Welcome to another tutorial video. This one is going to be more qualitative and a bit more focused on interview prep, as you can tell from the title. So this tutorial is in response to a very common question which we've been getting lately and over the years, which is, help, I have no time to prepare for interviews. There are so many guides, courses, and resources that I have no idea what to focus on. I only have 3 days before my interview. What should I do? And the truth is that if you only have 3 days left, it's going to be almost impossible to fully prepare. You can certainly review what you already know, but learning completely new concepts in that span of time is quite different. Many students and professionals spend months preparing and just learning the technical side, especially at the MBA level or beyond, and especially if they're making a big career change. With that said, you can still prepare for a good chunk of interviews more efficiently. Specifically, you can prepare for the fit questions or the qualitative questions more efficiently and finish the most important parts in only a few hours of time, which should fit your schedule, even if you only have a day or 2 days or 3 days before your interviews. To explain how you can do this, first we have to look at what you absolutely need to do before interviews and what you need to have prepared for interviews. If I were to make a checklist of everything you need for investment banking interviews, these 4 items would probably be at the top of the list. First off, you need to have your story prepared. In other words, what to say when they ask you to walk through your resume or CV, or what to say when they ask you to tell them about yourself. You should create a 150-word outline and then a 200 to 300-word full version. We've covered this concept elsewhere, so we're not going to go into it here. The second requirement is that you need answers to common fit questions about your strengths and weaknesses, your leadership style, your past work experience, how you work in a team, questions like that. The third requirement is deal knowledge. You need to know something about what the bank or group does. You need to know about a deal or market you've researched, and you also need to know about your own deals if you have deal experience. And then finally, the technical side. You need to know as much as possible, especially with the fundamentals, in other words, accounting and valuation. These topics are going to come up in almost any finance interview. Of course, the problem is that the fourth requirement here takes a very long time to teach and explain, so we can't go through it. And then the first requirement we've dealt with elsewhere. And the third requirement, we don't have specific lessons or tutorials on, but we may go through it in the future. And so here, I'm going to focus on the second requirement, the answers to the common fit questions. To answer these questions, you should think about the rule of 3. You should avoid memorizing 77,123 different questions and answers. It's a waste of time, and you're not going to remember any of those. Instead, you want to develop your story, which should answer many common fit questions in advance. Questions like why you're making a career change, or why you want to get into banking, or why you did another internship before investment banking. And then in line with this rule of 3, you should develop 3 short stories about your work experience, 3 strengths and 3 weaknesses, and then 3 real weaknesses, and discuss how to address them. Now, the reason you have to do these separately is because your main story is probably not going to have 3 separate short stories about your work experience. You don't have very much time or space. You're probably not going to mention your top strengths and weaknesses in your story, and you're certainly not going to mention your real weaknesses in your story. So these require some separate preparation to address. Once you have an outline for these questions, you can use and reuse these responses to answer pretty much all the qualitative questions that could come up. Let's start by looking at your 3 short stories first. You want to have 1 success story, 1 failure story, and then 1 leadership story. The success and failure stories are similar. You face a difficult task or challenging goal, you fought against the odds, and then in the success story you succeeded, you won, but in the failure story you did not succeed, but you learned something important or you changed in the process. And then the leadership story can be a success story as well, ideally, but it should be about a team effort. So you can use individual stories for the success story and the failure story, but the leadership story has to be in a team because any bank and any finance firm are going to be looking for your ability to work in a team. With these stories, you want to demonstrate your analytical skills, your ability to communicate with clients, your ability to work in or lead a team, how you can work long hours, how you're very attentive to detail, and you want to show that you have a demonstrated interest in finance. It's not enough just to say that you're really interested in deals. You want to show that you've actually followed them and either worked on deals before or participated in case competitions or written stock pitches or something else that shows that you have a demonstrated interest in finance. Here are 3 examples. For a success story, you could talk about a corporate finance internship you completed at IBM, where you analyzed a lot of transactions and you streamlined the most time-consuming processes and you saved thousands of man-hours in the process. Now, that was more of an individual effort, which is fine for your first success story. For your failure story, you could talk about how you started a math tutoring business in university. You succeeded at first, but you had trouble scaling it, and you learned in the process that you have to separate roles and delegate more efficiently and have someone dedicated to scaling it, hiring people, doing marketing. And so if you're focused on delivering the product or service, the other person can focus more on the operational side. And then finally, for a leadership story, you can talk about how you worked at a biotech company in the treasury department there, and the company was in danger of breaching a covenant on its debt. So you had to coordinate with other departments, work in a team to move cash around so the company can meet its covenant. By doing so, you helped it avoid penalty fees. So those are just 3 simple examples. You should go through your resume and come up with one example for each category, and then you can use that example to answer any type of qualitative question that could come up. Now, for your 3 strengths and 3 weaknesses, the strengths are pretty easy. You should already know what bankers want to see. Attention to detail, quantitative ability, ability to work in a team, ability to work in long hours, everything we just covered. You want to tie these to your success and leadership stories and then use those stories to support your strengths. So if they ask you your greatest strength, state it, and then to support what you say, go through a quick version of your success or leadership story. Your weaknesses are much harder, and the truth is I've never once heard a good initial answer to the what's your greatest weakness or what are your greatest weaknesses question. Your weaknesses have to be real, but not too real. They can't be overly personal, and they must be problems that you could potentially fix. So terrible answers to this question might be, I work too hard, or I'm not good at math, or I don't stay in touch with my family, or English is not my first language. I work too hard is not a real weakness. I'm not good at math is a deal breaker weakness. If you're not good at math, don't go into the finance industry. I don't stay in touch with my family is irrelevant and overly personal. And then English is not my first language is not a problem that you can fix at age 25 or 20 or 30, or really any age past 1 or 2. A better example of a weakness is something like, I sometimes take too much time to make decisions, or I second guess myself. Or sometimes I don't feel comfortable speaking up even when I'm sure someone else has made a mistake. Or I'm not always good about following up on tasks and seeing what I need to change or improve. These are all real weaknesses, and they could affect your performance on the job, but they're not universal weaknesses. It depends on the situation. Sometimes if you notice a mistake, for example, you don't want to speak up because it's going to embarrass senior bankers or your client or someone else. Also, none of these is a real deal breaker weakness. No one is going to listen to one of these and say, oh, well, you take too long to make decisions, therefore we can't hire you. They want you to make the right decisions and get them done quickly, but on balance, bankers would rather see that you make the right decisions rather than finishing too quickly and making the wrong decisions. And with all these, you can use your failure story to support them and to show what you've learned in the process from making some of these mistakes. Finally, we get to the last category, your 3 real weaknesses. And the reason this is important is because banks are risk averse. If you show a bank 2 candidates, one candidate who is competent in all areas and has no major flaws, and then another candidate who's even better, who's exceptional in almost all areas, but who has one big problem, the bank is almost always going to want the first candidate who's competent and has no major problems because banks are very risk averse. So these weaknesses are not your responses to questions about weaknesses, they're your real weaknesses. What bankers are going to press you on and question you about, even if they're not part of a formal question about your weaknesses. To figure out what these might be, you should compare yourself with the ideal candidate for investment banking roles. That ideal candidate, in terms of education, probably went to a top private school for a high school or secondary school, and then went to a university like Princeton, Harvard, Oxford, or Cambridge. He or she has perfect grades and test scores, majored in something relating to accounting or finance, and then also speaks 2 to 3 languages fluently, which is especially important if you're applying to roles in Europe, for example. In terms of work experience, he or she has had a corporate finance internship, a boutique investment banking internship, and then an internship at a bulge bracket or elite boutique bank. He or she has studied abroad in Asia or South America, plays sports, and has won international recognition. And then he or she is also sociable, charismatic, and makes friends very easily and puts people at ease whenever they meet new people. Now, of course, this type of person is very rare, and in real life, you will almost never see someone like this, which is why it's the ideal candidate, not the most common candidate. To find your weaknesses, think about how you're different from the profile of this person. For example, do you have low grades or test scores? Did you go to a non-target university? Do you not know other languages if you're applying to roles in London? Do you not have prior investment banking experience? Do you not have internships? Are you too old? In other words, have you worked for over 10 years, for example? Can you work long hours? Do you know about accounting and finance? With your hobbies and interests, are you boring? A lot of accountants and lawyers come in, and bankers have that stereotype about them, for example. Have you not played sports or other team activities? Do you not have real hobbies? Could you pass the airport test? If you're stuck in an airport with someone for hours or half a day, can you entertain the person? Or will the other person want to poke their eyes out and jump off a cliff after spending that much time with you? And then there are other categories as well. So if you're an international student, do you speak English well enough to work here if you're in the US or UK or Canada or Australia or other countries like that? Do you know the culture? Are you willing to take a pay cut? Do you have a work experience gap? Those are just a few of the ideas you want to think about with this question. Your goal is to find and address your top 3 real weaknesses. In other words, the top 3 ways in which you differ from this ideal candidate for investment banking roles. If you went to a non-target university, you could say that your family didn't have enough money to send you to an Ivy League school if you're in the US. If you're in another country, this approach doesn't work as well because universities are much cheaper, but you could make it about a specific program that you want to complete or a scholarship at the school, or give some reason why you had to be in the area, maybe to take care of family members or something like that. Or maybe just say that you weren't focused on investment banking when you first applied to universities, so you didn't know how significant it would be. If you have a perceived lack of accounting or finance knowledge, you can say that you did self-study, you took the CFA or you're studying for it, you're doing courses on the side, and you could even offer to prove your skills by taking some type of test or exam to showcase your knowledge. If you got started very late and you're older than other candidates, you can say that it was your plan all along. You got started late, but ever since your interest developed, you've been moving closer through a series of internships or full-time roles. So it's not as if you just became interested in banking yesterday. You became interested a few years ago. It was too late by that point to get the sequence of internships you needed to start in banking right out of university, but you've been doing everything you can to move closer, such as by working at a Big Four firm or an independent valuation firm or a business consulting firm and trying to gain relevant experience like that. Let's do a recap and summary now. With fit questions, the first step is to develop your story because that's going to answer a lot of the common questions in advance. The second step is what I call the rule of 3. Develop 3 short stories about your work experience, 3 strengths and 3 weaknesses, and then 3 real weaknesses. You should have 1 success story, 1 failure story, and 1 leadership story. And then for your weaknesses, they should be real but not too real. They should not be deal breakers, and they should be fixable. For your real weaknesses, think about the ideal banking candidate and how you're different from that person, and then make a plan for how to address your top 3 real weaknesses. If you spend 30 minutes or 60 minutes or even 2 hours coming up with these answers, you'll be able to answer almost any qualitative question in interviews. Now, there are some exceptions. You have to prepare for deal and company discussions separately. You need to learn about the industry separately. You need to follow recent market activity. And of course, you could get questions on all of those. But here, we are dealing with questions about you personally, your work experience, what you've done in the past, and how your personality matches the requirements for banking roles. If you do this, you can handle questions about those topics, your ability to work in teams, your leadership style, your biggest challenges, your failures, your successes, how well you can work under pressure, and so on. And as an added bonus, you won't have to memorize 77,123 questions and answers, and this is going to save you considerable time with your interview prep. So that's about it for this tutorial. I want to give you more of an outline for how to efficiently prepare for fit and qualitative questions in investment banking interviews.